Hi, I'm Michael Favala Goldman. I never intended to become a Danish translator. But 7 years ago, when I was working as a carpenter, I translated a Danish poem to comfort a friend of mine who was having a really hard time. And that act of translation as service has culminated in my 12th book, which I'd like to present, Dependency by Tove Ditlevsen. I'll read a brief quote. I feel good these days. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a baby. I'm in love with a young man, and soon we're going to have our own home. I tell Ebbe that I'll never leave him, and that I can't stand it when life gets so complicated, like it's been recently. He lifts my chin and kisses me. It could be, he says, that if you're complicated, your life gets to be like that too. Author Tove Ditlevsen led quite a complicated life, and she told it in these three memoirs, Childhood, Youth, and Dependency. They were recently published as the Copenhagen Trilogy, the first Danish books published as Penguin Classics in over 50 years. I translated the third book, Dependency, which can also be read on its own. Dependency chronicles Tove Ditlevsen's life from the age of about 23 to about 35, during which time she became a best-selling author in Denmark. She also had 4 failed marriages, 2 back-alley abortions, and an extended addiction to opioids. A few years following the publication of this book, when she was 58, she committed suicide. More than just a tragic and riveting story, Dependency gives a rare insight into the life and mind of a brilliant author who also had severe dependent behaviors and a drug addiction. And it gives readers a visceral understanding of what it could be like to be in her shoes. Dependent behavior is a spectrum which anyone can be vulnerable to, whether in her case it was drugs or relationships, but it could be drinking or smoking or gambling, food issues, money, work, whatever. There's plenty of dependencies to choose from. And our society encourages excessive behavior. But if someone goes off the rails and starts to cause harm, then they're judged for not having things under control. If you have been close to someone who has struggled with dependency or addiction, this story might be helpful to you. Which brings me to the real gift of this book, which is compassion for ourselves and for others. And that's why I think Penguin chose to publish it. Dependency can lead the reader to uncover this dark, repressed place in ourselves and in society. It's so pervasive if we would only look, so that we can be more conscious of our own blind spots and treat ourselves and each other with more kindness and support. I'd like to read a few excerpts from the book to give you a sense of her story and also her writing style. Tove Ditlevsen's first marriage was to a publisher who was 53 years old, more than twice her age. He was a respected patron of the arts in Copenhagen, and she's about to have her first novel published with his help. It's important to note that Tove Ditlevsen grew up very poor, and she was told that girls could not become writers. So this is an incredible step up the social ladder for her and also towards her career. I do whatever I can to please him, because I'm so thankful he married me. Although I know something still isn't quite right, I carefully avoid thinking about that. For some incomprehensible reason, Viggo F. has never taken me in his arms, and that does bother me a little, as if I had a stone in my shoe. It bothers me because I think there must be something wrong with me, that in some way I haven't lived up to his expectations. I feel glad when he smiles at me with his single tooth, pats my hand, says goodbye, and leaves for work. He doesn't want false teeth, because he says in his family men die at 56, and that's only 3 years away, so he doesn't want the expense. There's no hiding the fact he's stingy. He's never bought me a piece of clothing, and when we go out in the evening to visit some famous person, he takes the streetcar, while I have to ride my bicycle alongside. Not long into her marriage, Tova becomes pregnant from having an affair. I'm going to have a baby. I can hardly believe it. A tiny clump of mucus inside me is going to expand and grow every day until I get fat and shapeless. Ebbe isn't nearly as happy as I am. We have to get married, he says, and I have to tell my mother. I ask if he has anything against us getting married, and he says, no, it's just we're so young and we have no place to live. He gets a helpless look in his eyes at the thought of all the things to consider, and I kiss his fine, delicate mouth. I feel like I have enough strength for all three of us. Then I realize I'm not even divorced yet. So I write a nice letter to Viggo F. asking him for a divorce since I'm pregnant. Offended, he writes back, I have only one thing to say. Good grief. Go to a lawyer and get it done, and the sooner the better. When I show his letter to Ebbe says, he's ridiculous. What did you ever see in him? The first birth put a great strain on Tova's marriage to Ebbe. So when she gets pregnant a second time, Tova is determined to have an abortion, even though they're illegal. Eventually, she turns up a phone number for an abortion doctor, and she sets up a time. The doctor greets me in the entry, where a bare light bulb dangles from a hook in the ceiling. He seems nervous and grouchy. The money, he says flatly, holding out his hand. I give it to him, and he nods towards the examination room. He's about 50, small and shriveled, and the corners of his mouth droop as if he has never smiled. Come on up, he says, slapping his hand on the examination table with the hanging straps for patients' legs. I lie down with an anxious glance at the side table, which has on it a row of shiny, pointed instruments. Will this hurt? I ask. A bit, he says. Only a second. He talks like a telegram, as if he's trying to limit the use of his vocal cords. I shut my eyes, and a sharp pain darts through my body, but I don't make a sound. Done, he says. If you notice blood or fever, call Dr. Lauritsen. No hospitals. Don't mention my name. During her second marriage, Tova has a one-night stand with a medical student, and soon she's pregnant again. Since she doesn't know who the father is, she's determined to have another abortion, and she gets Carl, the medical student, to perform it in his dorm. Carl is infatuated with her and happy to do whatever she wants. He gives her a shot of the opioid Demerol, which was normal back then for birth pain. She loves the experience so much she asks for one more shot before she leaves, and then on the trolley back home. I think Demerol. The name sounds like birdsong. I decide never to let go of this man who can give me such an indescribable feeling. When I get home, Ebbe wants to know how visiting my friends was, but I only give him one-word answers. When he asks me what's wrong, I tell him I have a toothache. I roll over on my side in bed with my back to him, touching the little bump on my elbow from the injection. I am preoccupied with the single thought of doing that again. I could not care less about Ebbe or anyone else but Carl. So Tova marries Carl, who continues to give her shots of Demerol pretty much on demand. Tova begins faking an earache to get more shots, and then Carl sets up an ear operation for her fake earache. When I awoke from my anesthesia, my whole head was wrapped in gauze, and then I finally learned what an earache really was. I moaned in pain, rolling back and forth. "This hurts so much," I moaned to the doctor. "Can't you give me something for the pain?" "Of course," he said. We can give you aspirin. That's the strongest medicine we use in this ward. We don't turn people into addicts." When Carl finally arrived, he had his brown briefcase, and inside it, the blessed syringe. And when he gave me a shot in the open vein, I said, "You have to come by all the time. I've never felt pain like this in my whole life, and here they only give you aspirin." "They might as well give you sugar pills," he mumbled. "You have to speak louder," I said. "I can't hear you." "You're deaf in that ear," he said. "You will be the rest of your life, but at least it won't hurt anymore." After she's down to 65 pounds, an ambulance finally takes Tova to rehab, and her description of going through withdrawal is raw and visceral. I'm going to read one last excerpt, which is when she's feeling a bit better. "Gradually my miseries lessened. Now I was able to put my head down on my pillow without the walls creeping in around my bed, and I stopped staring at my watch constantly. I was let out of the belt, and I was allowed to go to the toilet, supported by one of the nurses. "Come here," she said gently, leading me to a sink. "Wash your hands. See if you can do it yourself." When I raise my head, I see myself in the mirror, and I put my hand over my mouth to hold back a scream. "That's not me," I cry. "I don't look like that. That's not possible." In the mirror, I see a worn-out, aged stranger's face with gray, scaly skin and red eyes. "I look like I'm 70, I sob, clinging to the nurse, who leans her head in on my shoulder. There, she says. "I didn't think of that. But don't cry. When you start getting insulin, it will be much better. You'll get more meat on your bones, and you'll look like a young woman again, I promise. It happens all the time." When I'm in bed again, I lie there looking at my toothpick arms and legs, and for a moment I'm full of rage at Carl. Then I remember I carry my share of the blame as well, and my rage disappears. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll consider picking up the book. I'd also be happy to come and talk about the book with your group. Have a nice